Hello, I'm Summer Sandiford and I'm going to be presenting our first experiment for Lab 1. So we have everything we need to begin with. We have our 1 quart pan, salt, sugar, cornmeal, measuring cup, tablespoon, and thermometer. Okay, to begin with, we just started with 2 cups of water in a 1 quart pan, and I boiled it, and it's important to note that I had my thermometer on Celsius and not Fahrenheit, so I got it to 98.1 when it started boiling. Next, after adding 1 tablespoon of salt, the boiling point rises to 99 degrees Celsius. And here's where I need to talk about the first limitation of this lab. I did the adding wrong, and instead of adding just another tablespoon to make it 2, I added 2 more tablespoons, so this makes it 3 in total, and it quickly jumped to 105 Celsius. So we can already see that the boiling point's increasing and the vapor pressure is decreasing. Okay, so now I've added 2 more tablespoons of salt, which puts us at 5, and we're at 104.5 degrees Celsius. We're gonna have to start excusing the salt around my stove at this point. Okay, so here I've added 4 more tablespoons of salt, which is way more than the lab originally called for. But we're at 105 degrees Celsius. So obviously we've seen that the more solute, which is the salt that we added in, has increased the boiling point a ton just because of the decrease of the vapor pressure. And we can see how the salt is completely diluting into the water, creating one mixture, which is why we have less vapor pressure to go off of. Okay, so now we're starting again by just boiling the water, but with sugar. We haven't added sugar yet, but we're doing sugar this time. I expected this to be similar to the salt just because they're both they're pretty good solutes and they dissolve pretty easily into the water. So I did expect for the boiling point to rise again on this one. So with 1 tablespoon of sugar added, we see that it's not rising as quickly as the salt is, but it is only 1 tablespoon yet, but it did only rise 0.1 degrees Celsius. Okay, so now I've added 2 more tablespoons of sugar and it jumped to 98.9 degrees Celsius, which again isn't really a huge jump when you think about how I've added 3 tablespoons at this point, but it is rising, so we see that the boiling point is rising. Okay, so at this point I've added 3 more tablespoons of sugar, and it's gone back down, but we're seeing it's kind of stabilizing around 98.2, 98.3 area. So the boiling point is not rising as much as it did with the salt. This could be due to a number of things like the granule size or yeah. Okay, so now let's start with our second part of the lab where we're baking cookies. So you can see we have 2 balls of cookie dough on each of the baking sheets. We have a dark baking sheet, a shiny baking sheet in the back, and a glass one in the front. I made my cookie dough balls 2 tablespoons. The oven was set to 325 and I cooked them all for 14 minutes. Okay, so first we're going to start by reviewing the ones in the glass pan. You can already see that they're really thin, they're super gooey, they don't look done, they're not done, super soft, and the taste of them, they were really sweet, and I think that's because they hadn't had the chance to cook all the way together yet. And this is due to the glass pan, because the glass pan reflects all the heat, so things in there usually take longer to cook. Okay, to me, the cookies cooked on the dark pan turned out perfect. They were obviously very even, they're cooked all the way through, the edges are just a little bit darker and there's more of a paler center, but so the taste, they were sweet, the browning on the edges created like a good crunch and an even sweetness throughout. The middle was all the way done too, so they were really good. And I think this even bake really resulted from the fact that the dark pan absorbs and distributes the heat really evenly throughout the cookies, which makes them cook all the way through a lot better. Okay, so for the shiny pan, we see that the cookies are also pretty even, but they're pretty pale, like they're not very browned. But they did have crunchy edges, which was interesting. The edges were a lot crunchier than the middle. And this is probably due to the fact that the light reflects really well in this shiny pan, so you're gonna get like a paler look to it, and they're not gonna be cooked as all the way through. But they looked even, but they had a pale inside, and it had crispy edges, and they tasted like a lot milder because of the crunchy edges. I feel like it had like a deeper taste almost because everything was really cooked together. Okay, so some deviations that may have occurred was that the cookie dough I used did sit in the fridge for like a whole day without the wrapper on it, so it wasn't as moist as it would have been originally. And also, while one was cooking at a time, the other two were just sitting there and they had more time to become like room temperature and whatnot, which could affect the baking a little bit. And also, I feel like because they were the exact same thickness, we really get to see how the pan holds it and makes them even. And now that I'm looking at it back, the shiny pan really did make the most even cookies. So before the lectures in the book, I would not have had expected this because I really didn't know. I'd never cooked cookies on a glass pan before. I think that's just, I'd never done it. But I wouldn't have thought there was a difference in between the shiny and the duller one. So that did change my thinking on that. I'm definitely going to go with the duller one. That's actually what I cooked all the rest of the cookie dough on after I was done. But yeah, I think that through the material, this really reinforced the fact that like how the different materials cook in the oven. Also to mention that I cooked all the cookies on the middle rack. Okay, so now I've added an additional 4 tablespoons of sugar and it's gone to 98.3. Now, there are a number of reasons, like I said before, that the boiling point could be like coming back to a stable time or just like we're kind of at the beginning. But because I did add like the wrong amount of tablespoons and I went up so high, it could just have such a large amount of sugar in there, it's hard for it to heat at all and rise to boiling point because it's so heavy. Okay, so we're starting fresh again. We're reboiling the water and it starts boiling at 98.1 degrees Celsius. Okay, so with 1 tablespoon of cornmeal added, we see that the temperature has jumped up 0.5, which isn't a huge significant leap, but it is noting that the boiling point is rising due to the cornmeal. Okay, so now I've added 2 more additional tablespoons of cornmeal and it's gone up to 91.2. And you can kind of see that the boil is lower, but I think that's just because it's starting to congeal because of the amount of cornmeal I've added. So that's another limitation with this lab. Because I added the wrong amount, we're seeing at a higher dosage. Okay, so this is at 3 more additional tablespoons of cornmeal. And the temperature hasn't moved, it's 91.2 degrees Celsius still, but you can see in the pot that it has congealed a lot. Like it's starting to stick to the edges and I'm having to like scrape it. So it's not dissolving at all. So we're seeing now that, or what we're about to see is just showing how it's congealing and it's cooking. Okay, and I wanted to go ahead and correct myself. I said the boiling point has increased, but it has decreased. And we see now that it's sticking to the edges, it's congealed, the boiling point has lowered, and I think there's just like so much of it in there that it's not being able to boil through, so obviously we're not being able to see that full boil at 212 degrees Fahrenheit and 100 degrees Celsius. I'm going to say that our lab results were pretty expected, for even though it was performed a little differently, because the salt did raise the boiling point because it dissolves, it's a great solvent, and it lowers the vapor pressure. I was more surprised with the sugar that didn't follow that, but the chemical makeup of salt and sugar is just different, so that can differ that also. The cornmeal I did expect for the boiling point to lower because it's not a solvent, and it's just going to more congeal and become like you're going to cook it, so it's not going to be boiling as much.